Hello everybody, how are you doing? Welcome back to Rule of Two Review. Today we're going to discuss, on this Star Wars video, one of my favorite movies of all time, The Phantom Menace. So obviously it's a little bit of a cheat to call The Phantom Menace one of my favorite movies of all time, because I am a Star Wars super dork, which means every Star Wars movie is one of my favorite movies of all time. But The Phantom Menace is a unique film that has a unique place in the history of the Star Wars saga, both in terms of the story it's telling, both in terms of its reaction and reception, the longevity of the film, the fact that it's been very divisive over the years, and the fact that it was also the movie that signified the first return of Star Wars after the first gap in films we ever had between Return of the Jedi in 1983 and The Phantom Menace in 1999. So, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Why am I really talking about it today? Well, what I wanted to discuss is why The Phantom Menace is an integral part to the Star Wars story, the story of Anakin, and then, of course, all the stories of all the different characters that come after that story. And this really started because with Episode 8, The Last Jedi, coming up very soon, myself and some of my friends got together this past weekend and we started what will be a 3-night endeavor to go through all of the Star Wars episodes in the machete order, leading up to The Last Jedi. And the machete order, of course, is known for kind of chopping up the order and treating the prequel films as sort of a flashback between Empire and Jedi, and it's a great idea. I've never had the opportunity to watch the films in that order before, and very famously, when it comes to the machete order, there are two ways that people typically go about watching movies in the machete order. There's what I think is the right way, and there's the ridiculous and wrong way, and that's what sparked this conversation. The correct way to watch machete order, of course you probably know, is starting with A New Hope, then you watch Empire. At the end of Empire, Darth Vader reveals the big surprise twist to Luke and to the audience, hey, I am your father. Obi-Wan didn't kill your father. It's me. I'm the guy. Let's be afraid. And once that happens, the audience is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. The bad guy is the dad of the good guy. This is insane. And then you go and watch the entire prequel trilogy, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith. You treat those films and the story of Anakin Skywalker falling to the dark side as a flashback of sorts to the reveal of Darth Vader. And then, after Revenge of the Sith, you come back and you watch Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, and then everything is fancy and hunky-dory. And nowadays, we have Episode 7, The Force Awakens, to add on to the end if you want as well, and then, of course, Last Jedi, and so on. And so that's one way to do it. That's the real way to do it. And I think the way most people would do it. However, there is another very popular way to watch the machete order, and it's to do the same thing, only without including The Phantom Menace. Of course, in that order, you're watching Episode 4, then 5, then 2, then 3, then 6. So it's literally all of those films in the same order, no Phantom Menace. Now, again, this is what really sparked me to want to discuss it, and the whole reasoning that people who choose to watch it that way have is, oh, well, what The Phantom Menace doesn't really have anything important to do or say, and it's just really, it's an unimportant movie, and it just doesn't matter. Basically, that's the nature of the argument. So that's something that both fans of the film and non-fans of the film will say. I mean, somebody who doesn't like the movie, which I know that there's a contingent of people who don't like the movie or even like the prequels, I understand at least their logic. I obviously don't agree with it, but I understand their logic. Regardless, the idea that the movie doesn't have anything important to do or say, to me, is completely bollocks, and I'm hoping to really shatter that idea with this video today. The defense is that, you know, there's nothing important happening in that movie. It's, you meet Anakin as a little boy, but is that necessary to the story? The stuff that happens in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith is much more important to Anakin's story, his fall to the dark side, and everything happening with Luke and everyone around it in all of the other movies. And while I do think that it's true that 2 and 3, Clones and Sith, do have a lot more to do with that story than Phantom Menace does, that doesn't mean that The Phantom Menace doesn't have important things to do and say. Sure, it's a lot of political stuff that I absolutely love, but maybe doesn't have to be as integral to the story to pay attention to. It's got the pod race, which of course is a blast and we all love it, but is it really that important? Are we just wasting time with things in The Phantom Menace when we really could have just skipped it and gone right to Anakin as a teenager? So there are a couple of major reasons why I think that this is all wrong, and in no way, shape, or form should anyone who goes through the Star Wars saga ever skip The Phantom Menace, because in fact, I will make this claim right now, in fact, The Phantom Menace has literally the one most important thing to Anakin Skywalker, the most integral piece of history that actually determines why he fell to the dark side. It is the thing that makes the Phantom Menace arguably one of the most important stories in the entire saga. And there's a plethora of other things that I'll get into as well. But what's the main thing? What is the main reason I'm talking about why the Phantom Menace matters and why it has the most important character beat for Anakin of all the films? And it is simply the attachment to his mother. That is the driving force of Anakin's fall to the dark side. And it's great because that's sort of counterpoint to what a lot of people think. Everyone talks about it's Padme. It's Padme is the reason that Anakin falls to the dark side and turns to Darth Vader and does all of these evil things. While that's not wrong, there's actually nothing but truth to that. Padme is a motivating factor in everything that happens, especially in Revenge of the Sith. That's not the real thing. That's not the real problem with Anakin, his real character flaw. His character flaw is that he was old enough by the time he was discovered by Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. He was old enough to have known his mother, to have formed a relationship to his mother, and to have loved his mother. He learned attachment, and he learned love. And through that, all of these bad things that Force-sensitive Jedi aren't supposed to be able to feel and to emote, he has within him. And it's great because the flaws of the Jedi are exposed in the prequels, in the prequel trilogy, partly because of what happens in The Phantom Menace. And Yoda even says it. Yoda and Mace Windu, when they're first meeting and analyzing Anakin, they say he's too old. We sense danger. We see this as a bad move. He's too old. It's not safe for us to take him and to train him to be a Jedi. Qui-Gon believes they're wrong, of course, and we know the events play out the way they do, and eventually Obi-Wan takes him as his Padawan. But what happens in The Phantom Menace is we see that he probably was too old. And no surprise, Yoda was right. He was too old. It was a huge mistake. For Anakin to have not been discovered soon enough and taken into the Jedi Order at an even younger age, he became a 9-year-old boy who was he was a slave, so I can't call it a job, but he was working for his master. He was accomplishing things. He was building things. He had his own personality. Him and his mother were very close. It was the only person he had. And that is something that the whole prequel trilogy delivers on, and Lucas always made sure to remind people of. The love of his mother is what allowed him to learn to love, so that by the time he met Padme and had a chance to fall in love with Padme, he had that ability within him. It was the weakness he couldn't let go of. And Attack of the Clones is so great because there are many moments where we realize how important his mother is. He keeps dreaming of his mother. He keeps worrying about his mother. He keeps wanting to go back and see her, and he wants to rescue her. He's so worried about losing her and something bad happening to her that he makes bad decisions in Attack of the Clones to go and help her and rescue her and find her, despite the fact that it goes against what the Jedi Order is commanding him to do. So he is not doing his due diligence as a Jedi because his love for his mother, which he shouldn't even have in the first place, is so strong. And again, it's that same love that lets him realize, well, I also have this woman in my life, and I love this woman too. I have similar feelings. I had these feelings with my mom, and now I'm meeting somebody who's a peer, who's my age, who I think is attracted to me, and now I'm attracted to her. And so now I want to follow through on these feelings. I want to follow through on these emotions and have a relationship with this woman because I've already learned how great the feeling of love feels. And if we were to have seen these events play out, Anakin falling in love when he never should have been taught how to love, and Anakin making poor decisions and ignoring the Jedi's commands to go and save his mother in the first place, and then, of course, have her die in his arms, if we didn't have the Phantom Menace to show us where Anakin came from as a little boy when he still lived with his mother, it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't follow through. And so for that reason, that is the #1 reason that the Phantom Menace is incredibly important, at least to Anakin. Now, there's a couple of other really important things that the Phantom Menace does that I think do matter, but there are two other main beats that I'm going to talk about. One of them, my girlfriend even made me aware of. I wasn't even thinking about it, so props to her. But first, we'll get to the other big thing, and it's the Phantom Menace itself. The Phantom Menace in the movie The Phantom Menace is the return of the Sith. It is the return of the essence of the dark side. The Jedi know and slowly sense that something bad is happening. The Sith have been extinct for millennia. That's what Mace Windu says. That lets us understand the state of the Force and the Jedi and the Sith at the time the Phantom Menace happens. 40 years, I believe, before Episode 4, A New Hope. And all of a sudden, Darth Maul and Sidious are about, and they're doing things. And Darth Maul confronts Qui-Gon on Tatooine when Anakin is right there by his side. And suddenly, who is this evil, dark, force-wielding, lightsaber-wielding character? Where did this person come from? Is it a Sith? And of course, the Jedi say that's impossible. It can't possibly be. But it turns out that what the Phantom Menace tells us, by the title alone is telling us why the movie matters, is that the Sith have returned, the dark side has returned. Suddenly the Force, whether it's being further balanced or unbalanced with the return of the Sith, that's a whole weird mystery that there's 100 theories on both sides about, and how does the chosen one fit into it. I've discussed that. That's not what I'm getting into. But the fact that it's happening is important. And the Phantom Menace represents not only all the stuff about Anakin's character, but also in terms of the story, the state of the galaxy, the state of the political standing, the state of the Jedi Order, and the Jedi as a belief, and who they were. Everything happening with the return of the dark side and the Sith is incredibly important. Those are also events that carry through the entire prequel trilogy, into Attack of the Clones, into Revenge of the Sith. We have to have the Sith exist and return for there to be any Sith to be revenging, and so that's what happens in the Phantom Menace, simply by Darth Maul and Sidious existing and fighting. And it's great because it justifies so much of what's happening in that movie. And again, the events of what Palpatine is doing and everything in Clones and Sith doesn't make sense. And we need all of these things to create Darth Vader. And we need Darth Vader to be the amazing villain in the unbelievably fantastic original trilogy and be the foil to our hero Luke Skywalker. Like, it's all interconnected. This is what Lucas does. It's why he's a mastermind. And it's why Phantom Menace matters. We have to see these things happen to make the entire story from episodes 1 to now 7 actually matter. And really quickly, the one last point I'll touch on why the Phantom Menace is an important picture that does matter is, again, this is what my girlfriend made me realize when we were discussing the idea a couple of days ago, is that Phantom Menace also is the origin of Obi-Wan's story. This is the earliest in the timeline we've ever seen anything from Obi-Wan. And I mean, I think we all know that Obi-Wan is a kind of important character when it comes to Star Wars. He affects both trilogies, and I think even very possibly is going to be affecting the newest trilogy soon as well. And so what's Obi-Wan's story? Well, Phantom Menace lets us understand Obi-Wan as a Padawan. We get the beginning of his role in all of the bigger pictures happening in the galaxy and in the Skywalker story and in the Star Wars saga. That is what the Phantom Menace shows us. We understand, okay, well, the Jedi Order, it turns out it operated this way before Episode 4, A New Hope. They were their own order. They were part of the government. They were protectors of peace and justice in the galaxy. And they operated with a master and an apprentice sort of thing. And Obi-Wan was one of those apprentices. He was a Padawan. And we see his master is important. His master discovers Anakin, who becomes Darth Vader, who becomes the father of Luke Skywalker. And again, it's that Lucas mastermind interweaving everything and all the poetry of everything rhyming. It all makes sense. And Obi-Wan matters so much to Luke Skywalker and so much to the original trilogy because he's our real connection to the Force and what the Force is when it's first introduced to audiences with A New Hope and Empire and all that stuff. The original trilogy kind of relies on what Obi-Wan represents. And getting to know Obi-Wan and understanding his story as it relates to Vader / Anakin's in the prequel trilogy is incredibly important. And the brilliance is, that is what the Phantom Menace shows us, the beginning of Obi-Wan. So yeah, I think that's it. You know, hopefully you guys found this informative and interesting and maybe gave you a different spin or perspective on the Phantom Menace specifically than you might have had before. Again, whether you like or dislike the movie, I still think it's an interesting conversation to have. And the really interesting thing about Star Wars is that even though there are some people who don't enjoy the prequel trilogy, for example, it's interesting because when people still want to watch and understand the full Star Wars story, I think a lot of people, not everyone, but even a lot of people who maybe don't like those films will still watch and include them in a marathon to get the whole story. And I think it's because deep down they secretly know, yeah, this is great. It is brilliant. It turns out Lucas did know what he was doing the whole time. So anyway, I don't want to go into prequel defending territory. That's not what this is about, and it's not even necessary anymore. Prequel lovers are all over the place, man. We're outnumbering everybody nowadays, and it feels so good to see. But regardless, I really wanted to just inspire possibly a different way to look at the Phantom Menace that people might not have ever been thinking about. The biggest thing here is I think so many people want to say Padme is the real reason Anakin turned to the dark side. And Padme was one of the cogs in the wheel, probably the biggest cog in the wheel. And obviously Padme, one of my favorite characters, an amazing character, and she was basically an important tool of many tools that Palpatine used through the dark side and the Force to manipulate Anakin. And because Anakin was able to learn the flaw of love through his mother, that's why Padme became such a fantastic piece to be used against him. And I love the idea that maybe people who hadn't thought about the attachment to his mother can now look at it this way. Because for me, I really see it more Anakin's love for his mother than Anakin's love for Padme that really began the downfall of Anakin Skywalker and led him to the dark side and led him to become the monster known as Darth Vader. So, and all these other things. So, talk about this below, guys. What do you guys think about The Phantom Menace as a movie? What do you think about why it does or doesn't matter? What about everything I laid out here? Does this make sense to you? Does it ring true for you and resonate with your views of The Phantom Menace or the Star Wars saga as a whole? Definitely discuss it. I love me some Phantom Menace, and that's going to be it for today's Star Wars video. So thanks as always for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.